stole it right back. Nader knocked one down from the same spot. He does it again. Nader takes a big shot, and it continues.
What's up, crew? Good to see you guys. We've been going over some of the very best individual performances from the Thunder's 2019-20 season so far. And next up on our list is Abdel Nader. He had a great home performance on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, against the New Orleans Pelicans, 19 points. And it was just during a stretch there where Abdul's offense was really cooking. And I wanted to get you guys' take on what he brought to that game. It was a 109-104 victory and a pretty crucial win for the Thunder heading into that month of December.
Well, they outscored the Pelicans in that game 30-20 in the fourth quarter. They were down by 5 going to the fourth, and it was a game where he and Dennis Schroeder stood out in guiding the Thunder bench to a massive win in terms of scoring against their opponents for New Orleans. It was like 58-37. He scored the 19, as you mentioned, Nick. And the thing that I love about his game that was really evident in this one is that he is fearless. If there's an available shot to him, even if he's going to look maybe not as good as he would hope, like taking it into the teeth of the defense and trying to make something happen, he's willing to do it. So I like that aspect of his game. It was very evident on this night. And this was a night where they needed some of that bravado that he brings to the floor in order to survive against a New Orleans team. Remember, going into the season, people viewed them as a serious playoff challenger. And even without Zion Williamson, have talent. We didn't know. How did the Thunder match up with this team? This is the first time they're facing them. This was a significant win, I think, head-to-head with New Orleans, a team they'd ultimately sweep. And Nader was a big factor in that victory.
Yeah, man, I thought we saw the evolution of Nader's game really show up in the fourth quarter. This was coming off of a career-high 23-point effort on the road against Portland. He carried it into this game and showed up when the Thunder needed it most, trailing by 8 early in the fourth quarter. And you saw a sequence where Abdel really showed the progress of his game. He had a drive and a dish to Nerlens Noel, and then he was able to spot up and knock down a 3. He had a nice stretch there, and that's really what – has been his strength, his decision-making and when to take that 3 and when to drive to the bucket and be aggressive. And he's done that at a really high level this year that's gotten him his minutes out on the floor. It's not just the scoring. He's reliable on the defensive end, but it showed up big in the fourth quarter and in the second half for the Thunder when they were trailing a good offensive team in New Orleans.
Well, I think one of the hardest things for a young guy is coming off the bench and asked to do certain things. And a lot of times, they struggle. They go up and down with that role. I think, he kind of showed, look, there was a lot of promise from last season, and this was probably his big game so far in this early part of the season where, his points, his activity. When you're playing against the Pelicans, what do you got to do? You got to get back on defense. And they're lazy getting back the other way. I thought he took advantage of that a couple of times. He showed you in this game that he was ready to drive the ball hard to the basket and finish, not just stand out there and shoot threes and play a little defense along the way, because I thought his defense as the season materialized got better. And that's hard to do, to keep that marriage or that balance between offense and defense, balanced to a point where you can give a little bit of this and a little bit of that. His minutes were spotty. I thought he did a great job of managing this particular game. It was big because, as you said, it was a come-from-behind win, which the Thunder have done at that point very few times. And all of a sudden, you learn that you can count on this guy just as much as you can count on Dennis Schroeder.
He had the 2 scoring flurries at the beginning of the second and fourth quarters, but I love the way he started this game. One of his first touches, he tried to jam on Jahlil Okafor, drew a foul. And then the fact that he was on the floor until under 2 minutes left in this game, showing that the coaching staff really put trust in him. And guys, this is the second year in a row that Abdel started the season out of the rotation, but just continually through his work earned his way into that unit, being relied on both ends of the floor. What's your take on his season so far this year? Because he's continued to show improvement, not just in the statistical column, but just the way that he has been able to keep himself on the floor. Mike, let's start with you.
Well, I think that, when you look at him and the role he's been asked to play, he's played that role. And along the way, players have to continue to work on other areas of their game. And for Nader, we saw a little bit of a lot of good things, the shooting, the defense. I think that when you talk about, short-term projection, what's your role in the team, he understands that now. You can tell he's not really fighting it as much. Long-term projection, get better. And I always say on the air, getting better in this league is not always a straight line. Sometimes you're going to go a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, but you're going to get back to where you want to be at. And I think that he's in a great situation. He's always been in a great situation here because you're going to get those minutes. You don't know when coming off the bench. And he's adjusted to that. Like Schroeder, he's got a great mentor. And I got to know he's talking to Schroeder, because if I'm coming off the bench, I'm talking to Dennis Schroeder too, because I'm going to say, man, how do you do it night in and night out?
I think you've got to give credit to Abdel Nader's tireless work ethic. This is something that the coaching staff has been highlighting throughout the season, just his willingness to put the work in, because he was not guaranteed minutes coming into this game. He took advantage in this New Orleans game because Hamidou Diallo had gotten hurt. And that goes back to what took place last year when he got those minutes on the Christmas Day game against the Houston Rockets. His shot looks good, and he continues to put that work in and day out. I go back to him talking about, hey, look, I still need to get working even though there's no shoot-arounds on game days. Like, he's got to get moving. It's a guy who embraces getting out there and putting in that extra time into his game, and it's finally starting to show up. And I thought that it really showed up, too, in the final game of the season that the Thunder played to this point with those blocks on the defensive end against the Boston Celtics. He was getting some critical minutes in some critical games and became a reliable piece off the bench for Billy Donovan game in and game out.
One of the things that everyone loves about him is his work ethic. And given the fact that he's a blue-collar player and has had to earn everything he's gotten in the NBA, little known coming out of Iowa State, you have to give him a ton of credit. And he's one of the great sort of American stories that exists in the NBA, in that nothing promised, and he has had to earn everything that he's generated. And I look, Chris, not just the 4 blocks in that win against the Celtics, a 1-point win, by the way. So how significant are those 4 shots that were released and never got to the rim for Boston? But he never gives up on a play. He blocked 10 shots in the final 15 games. So he brings effort every time he's out there on the floor, and he never gives up on a play, which is substantial. And I think it rallies his teammates. It builds trust in his teammates that when he's out there, he's going to make something happen, whether it be on the offensive or the defensive end. And his defense continues to pick up because of his sheer will to get out there and be disruptive.
Matt, you mentioned Abdul's backstory and just his incredible journey, immigrant family coming over from Egypt, living in refugee housing in Chicago. Everything has been an upward trajectory for him and his family since then. But even over the last, month or so of the season, he was averaging almost 7.5 points per game over the final 11 games heading into that game on March 11th against Utah. I'm just curious from you guys' perspective as well, where is he headed in terms of being a contributor for this team when it gets down to gut check time, when he's got to match up with players on the opposing team in a shortened rotation? Where do you think he fits into this Thunder group come playoff time?
Well, the coaching staff has trust in him. So I think that in any moment, in any matchup, if there's foul issues that surround him at that wing position, they will without hesitation call his number. Billy Donovan has shown that, and Dooley has responded. And when you respond consistently in those scenarios, then I think the coaching staff has faith and trust in you. And I think now in his 3rd season in the league, guys, he's understanding some of the matchup intricacies, and he's doing a lot of film study. So when he's out there, it's not like you feel like there's a liability in an area of his game that's going to expose itself, that's going to cost you. I think that he's leveled out in terms of the consistency of what he's generating performance-wise. And remember, he's a 37% three-point shooter. Sometimes that flies way under the radar when he's out on the floor. I think defenses lose him, and he makes them pay when he's open without hesitation taking those shots.
Yeah, Matt, kind of to pick up on that point and his reliability, he had turned into a pretty reliable two-way player. And that's really what counts in the postseason. You never felt like Abdul was going to get exposed on either end. You saw the defense in the uptick toward the latter part of the season. You saw the reliable offense in the shooting and the driving. And that's something that the coaches could rely on. And that's why he was getting the consistent minutes that he was getting. So I don't think that we've seen really the ceiling yet on Abdel Nader's game because of the trajectory that we've seen over the last 3 years. He's still just 26 years old. I think we all believe that there's still some room to grow.
Well, you just keep getting better. I mean, keep doing what you're doing. I think you've shown that you can knock down the three. You've shown you have the ability to start. I think that the first 7 or 8 guys off, on the roster that plays are all part of one whole group. Really, Donovan taught me that a couple of years ago. He doesn't look at the first and second unit as, 2 separate groups, one whole part. And I think that when he can think that way and say, look, you know what, I know I'm going to get the time. And when I'm out there on the floor, it's going to be limited. You talked about that as well, Fish. Then what do I need to do? And how do I keep getting better? Putting in that time away from the court. He's done that. And then also producing when you're out there on the floor, passing the ball without turning it over, knocking down the corner three, running the floor. I think, man, I didn't realize he was that good of an athlete until this year. So it's been fun watching him.
Chris, you referenced his age, and I think there's a maturity to him, and it reminds me of something Nick Collison told me a while back, which is it's so hard for role players when they're young to be able to get into a game and be able to go 1 for 3 or 2 for 3, getting only just a handful of shots at most in limited minutes. And I think that's one thing that Abdul's done really nicely is when he's gotten into the game, he's actually been able to get into rhythm and knock down shots. I know that you guys have all seen night in and night out the way that he's been able to make an impact on this rotation. And it's sure been fun to watch. We're excited to see what he continues to do as he continues to rise with his NBA career. Thanks for joining me today, guys.